Meet the ocean.
Hello, Meet the Ocean listeners. Welcome back to the podcast. We've had a busy start to the summer with your podcast team moving cross country, starting new jobs, and traveling to Norway. But we're back with more stories, more wow moments, and of course, more opportunities to get up close and personal with the Big Blue. To kick off our comeback, we are sharing a podcast that was recorded a couple of months ago with Akil Wingate and our friends at FLICKFAIR Film Festival. Take a listen to Paul and Akil's conversation about filmmaking and all things Antarctica. Thanks to the FLICKFAIR Film Festival for sharing the audio with us. And on behalf of Paul, Andy, and myself, your trusty sound designer, Kelsey, we'll see you next time. Until then, may the salt water be with you.
Welcome back to the FLICKFAIR Film Festival official podcast with yours truly, Akil Wingate. Now, before the break, I promised you that our guest today has come to us all the way from an exciting adventure in the world of Antarctica. Now, let's not beat around the bush, because here is today's logline.
Logline.
Winter in Antarctica is a performance for the planet, combining the talent of Las Vegas's circus community and Antarctic conservation. My name is Paul North, and I am the nonprofit director, podcast host, polar diver, and director of the film we are speaking about today.
And there you have it, FLICKFAIR listeners. That is our guest, who is certainly a Swiss Army knife of talents. Paul, welcome to our show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, and Bonne Nuit, I believe you're in Paris.
Yes, absolutely. Bonne Nuit. So, you brought us this absolutely stunning film, Winter in Antarctica. Before we dive, no pun intended, into your film, could you give us a brief sort of character description of our lead hero, Antarctica, for those of us who are not as quite familiar with Antarctica?
Yeah, let's talk about the star of the film. So I think that's a great question, mainly because let's just start off thinking about when we look at a map of our whole planet, how is Antarctica represented? Usually at the bottom, which is where it is, but the actual visual representation is like this squished little blob. Some maps don't even include it. But I have had the privilege of being able to be a diver down there. So I actually get in the water. Sometimes I use a submersible that can go deeper than human physiology allows for, and I'm doing that on some vessels with National Geographic and Lindblad expeditions. But over the years, and I've been doing it for about 7 now, I saw Antarctica maybe more so in how you described it, like a character, and I started to think about how are we telling this character story. So, Antarctica is a wild place, more creatures than you can imagine, but most of them live below the waterline because obviously it's ridiculously cold. So the real punch of these ecosystems is below the water. And that's what we had an opportunity to not only expose people to with this film, but maybe start to get them thinking about these animals living their lives and leading out a narrative, because every creature on this planet it is.
And the film certainly gives us a bird's eye view of this absolutely stunning underwater landscape, as well as the creatures who inhabit its ecosystem. But also you couple it with some rather stunning, equally stunning performance pieces, choreographed performance pieces with an ensemble of aerialists, gymnasts, dancers, and juxtapose the two together, sort of in a moving poetry. Where did this idea come from?
This idea was birthed, out of two things. I would say necessity, because we do not give enough focus to Antarctica. It actually has a major influence on the biological processes of all the oceans on our planet, but also the climate, everything else in the air, but also out of opportunity. We think of this pandemic that we're all marching through. And when it first struck, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't go to work. I have to work from home, or my kid can't go to school. I have to tend to them. And we had all of these reversals and stops of processes. And, that affected all of our lives. But when you think about the performance community, like an actor can take 6 months off and then pick up a script and learn a line. But if you are a performer in Las Vegas, then your body is your tool, and you have to keep it tuned. You take 6 months off, that may be the end of a career if you're a contortionist or a specialist in some other manner. So what I found was a city full of closed doors, no performances, and people who were beyond hungry to continue their craft, not only to maintain, but to improve that tool that is their body. And what a weird little opportunity we had, and a narrow window for when they were available, but also no one was going to Antarctica. So we rolled all the dice and made a film.
Perhaps this is a rhetorical question, but I imagine, was it a sort of surreal experience to walk into this empty theater space onto a stage with more than a dozen performers, as well as venture out to Antarctica, where you are perhaps alone, so to speak, and in both cases capture things that nobody else would likely be able to see during present time?
Yes, surreal is the word. Every step of this process was one of chance and one of trust. A very small film by all regards, budget, timeline, participants, maybe 35 creatives were involved between the editing team, those who filmed the Antarctic footage, and then the actual performers themselves. But, I think we're going to dig into how we did it. But maybe one quick story where, and I think this is the time where I should really put my co-producer on a plateau, because her name is Ra Plasoy, and she is one of those magical creatures that can do everything and speaks everybody's language, maybe not the language that they speak, but the language of humanity in process of creativity. So she was the expediter. She picked me up from the airport and immediately brought me to this massive building in Vegas called the Circus Center. And, there was all manner of rehearsals going on. It was mind-boggling. But when she introduced me to the performers for the first time, not in costume, just, kind of in their, rehearsal clothes. And they're like, hey, we've been working on this. Can we show it to you? Absolutely, because I didn't have a part of that process. I was in charge of the Antarctic side. But when they hit the button on the janky little boombox that they had and started to perform, this massive training center just shut down, and everyone turned their eye because they're like, what is this? There are no shows going on right now. What is this ultra choreographed, beautiful dance that these two humans are doing? And they sort of formed a half circle and, applauded when it ended, and then started to ask all the questions. And I had been in Vegas for 90 minutes at that point, and I had an inkling that it might work.
Well, it certainly did work. My impression is you probably, when you were sitting there watching them, you were able to sort of superimpose in your mind the creatures you saw underwater in Antarctica as these dancers were sort of moving through their choreography. Do you remember the very first moment you actually began to connect the dots and say, oh, I see this. This reminds me of whatever moment that comes to mind when you were all the way back in Antarctica? Do you remember any magical moments of first seeing the rehearsal?
Several. Let's see if I can peg some. And just to give it a little backstory, I've been running a nonprofit that's been bringing Antarctica to schools and children's hospitals for like 5 years via virtual reality and all manner of other creative ways. So exploring how we bring Antarctica to audiences has kind of been my niche activity. And because I have a theater background, and that's where I met Ra, we were both at Arizona State together, myself as a playwright and her as a costume and set designer.
You were a playwright?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Ran my own theater company there for a little while. I have 2 plays published, and my last performance was in Los Angeles way back in 2013.
How did you get to Antarctica? What was the trajectory from being a playwright to venturing all across the globe to Antarctica?
Well, you're gonna have to read the book I'm working on. No, I'm kidding. So I think I can staccato this. Basically, got an MFA and a play published even before I left the program. But then had that classic student loan debt. So I told a white lie. I said I could cook. I ended up on a boat in Alaska, which turned me into this like ocean hungry explorer, and built up enough time underwater in Alaska to approach National Geographic, started to work for their expedition arm. And then the call came and said, hey, like, apparently you like rolling into severely cold water. Would you like to go from 45 degrees to maybe like 28? And
wow.
I said, sure.
Wow. I'm curious, at what point did you know that this was destiny for you? Diving underwater, particularly in freezing temperatures.
Job security.
Okay.
No. I mean, the willingness to do it is a real thing. And what I have found over the years is all of a sudden there's a lot of willingness, but then safety becomes a concern because, if you this film is 30 minutes long, but if you really understand what it took to get all the footage, it's equally as impressive as the performers, and, scattered out over like 12 creators, Ian Strachan, Eric Wehrmeister, all of my friends who I've been in Antarctica with, who said, oh, you're doing something in Vegas, because they didn't understand it yet because I was still making it at the time. And even now that it's made, I'm not sure if they understand it, but they really like it. So, back to your question of like, when did I get a notion that like things were coming together? And, I might just say the moment that Ra saw what I was speaking to and sunk her teeth into, because that's when the Vegas wheels started to turn. Yeah.
So meettheocean.org, which is your nonprofit organization, had actually come into fruition well before this film had hit our cinema screen, so to speak. But I'm guessing that the synapses in the brain cells started to click and say, listen, we've got our roots in theater, we've got our roots in playwriting and storytelling, but we also have our feet dug in as an adventurer and explorer, conservationist, etc. And you began to make the dots connect. Am I getting that correct? In terms of saying, okay, we can bring these two together to make a very powerful bit of narrative.
Yeah, we can tell a better story. We can get some crossover between these audiences of, Vegas performers, Antarctic scientists, and then the Venn diagram starts looking a lot more appealing. I mean, if you want to get like billboard bravado about it, like who else is bringing Antarctica to the desert of Las Vegas? And I dream of a time where I can get these performers down there, and see their eyes widen and share that gift that they stood up for, because this is a conservation film. It's beautiful, and the music will knock your socks off, but it has a purpose, and that is to define a marine protected area around the Antarctic Peninsula. And that's, in short words, that's where all the animals are. That's the concentration of biological activity, but it also is one of the most fished areas. So the purpose of this film is to say, my goodness, look at this beautiful place represented by beautiful performance, put that in a blender, create something that's never been made before. And maybe the 24 member nations that have the vote to say whether or not Antarctica gets a marine protected area, we start getting this in front of them. And that's a little different than the conservation strategy of old, which, I'm sort of ribbing them a little bit here. But when I see a politician, when they're with their arms around someone with a penguin suit, giving the thumbs up at a conference, that's not enough. We have to make these things happen. And using our creative voice is an immense way to do so when you get this level of participation.
You've been to Antarctica how many times in how many years?
Oh goodness. There was a 5-year period where I was averaging like 3 months down there a year.
Okay.
So you can kind of add that up. I've been in Antarctica for more than a year of my life, consecutively.
Now, in that time, over the evolution of that time, I only can imagine that you've seen sort of the effects of climate change firsthand. From your first experience going down to your most recent experience, have you noticed any dramatic changes since you've last been to Antarctica?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, very topical for all the reasons. Maybe recently you've seen the headlines for the Doomsday Glacier. That's also known as the Thwaites Glacier. Think of it as like a cork in a champagne bottle. So if that guy pops, then there's going to be a lot more ice following that. But that is on a different side of Antarctica than I visit. Back to that peninsula, I've been all up and down it south of the Antarctic Circle. Just for shock value, the coldest water I've ever gone diving in is 27.2 degrees Fahrenheit. My regulator did freeze and explode in my mouth.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Very dramatic. But I think I can lend a different perspective than most people will say, because I think our brain goes directly to ice because that's where the headlines are. Antarctica in places has like 2 miles of ice on top of it. That's more towards the center, which is a desert. So is Vegas. I kind of like that connection of 2 deserts. But I would say as a diver, that's where I've seen the most change. If you think about the rhythms, right? In winter comes the ice, and Antarctica actually like doubles in size because of the sea ice. If you look at it from a satellite, it's 2 times bigger if you include that sea ice in there. And of course, that has huge rhythmic changes on the community. And for, pre-humanity, for a good long time, that ice was that sea ice was existing longer, allowing for biological processes to take place, like algae growing on the underside of the ice, because the sun actually does penetrate and things have a food source. If things have a food source, they grow and then other things eat them. So that ice is kind of like layer 0 of the Antarctic food chain. And because that's breaking up sooner, those rhythms are getting interrupted. And if anyone is a music fan, and all of a sudden the drummer loses their beat, then the music changes. And that's also true with an ecosystem. So I'm seeing surplus of some other creatures that should be there, but shouldn't be there in the numbers that they are, because now they're competing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
There's no sort of checks and balances in the food chain, so to speak, as once before. For example, you have a nice sort of scene in the film where we see the krill the actual krill underwater, and we see the legs of the krill moving kind of like several ballet dancers in the water. And then of course we juxtapose that with the dancers on stage who are also moving with their legs sort of in the same motion. But the message that you had in the narration was that the krill eat the algae, and bigger animals eat the krill. But if there is no algae, or if there is no krill, or if there is no sort of cycle of life balance like we had before, this all goes up in flames, so to speak. How, gosh, I don't want to be I don't want to be alarmist, but how worried are you, given your exposure to Antarctica firsthand?
Good question. There's no wrong in sounding the alarm when the alarm needs be sound. I think we, as a human society, are getting a little wary of hearing the bad news. But if we hear it and can make strategies against it, then we can better the outcome. Now I will dismount my soapbox. Thank you so much for focusing on the krill, because that is the focus of the film. The real star of the film is our trapezist. I hope I said that right. Karen, and she is dressed like a krill doing all sorts of things. And we merged that with the krill footage. It's actually one of my favorite scenes outside of the group dance with the young ladies of the Nevada Rhythmic Academy. But what's the way to dumb it down? If you go to a sandwich shop and they don't have bread, then what are you going to do? And, you go to Antarctica and the krill aren't what they used to be, then Antarctica is not what it used to be. And you heard me earlier, I scurried away from my playwriting habits and went to become a commercial fisherman. So I have a specific and unique lens on that world, which I think informs how I talk about conservation, because, we need to eat. And the krill in Antarctica are being taken by us, by humans. And technology has emerged that it's basically like a vacuum. And when that new tech came out, that vacuum was so efficient that one boat got the entire year's quota, I think in like 3 days or something ridiculous like that.
Wow.
So it's like, oh, we got a vacuum. We are now vacuuming the ocean and still selling like penguin postcards throughout the world while we're taking food out of their mouths. It's, because I'm down there leading expeditions and showing people Antarctica for the first time and seeing the wonder and the immensity of it affect them. It is a delicate dance to then sort of flip the card over and be like, and now let's talk about what's happening to this place. So that is a balance that I have to maintain while I'm communicating with humans on board. When I'm at home and I have all my creative tools about, I think that's when I really dig in, because back to that idea of how are we telling Antarctica's story is kind of the utmost importance to me.
Random question. What does 22 degrees Fahrenheit feel like in a wetsuit underwater in Antarctica?
27.2. I only say that because my scientist friends are going to come at me. For those who know the freezing point, and I know you're in Celsius land, but 32 degrees is normally the freezing point of water. But if you add a high amount of salinity, that temperature drops. You ask what it's like. Your body is in an alarm state for the first 7 minutes, no matter what you have on underneath the suit. I say that, but there's new tech where there's Bluetooth heated vests that you can wear and things are getting a little more comfortable. But in that instance, the algae was so thick that I struggled to see my hand in front of my face. So now your visibility is challenged. There's large chunks of ice all over your head. You're heading down on a rocky slope where you see no life. and you have camera in your hand and there's like 150 people waiting for you to bring back something amazing. And what does that feel like? You're I don't know, a joke that I use is that's when I say like, why didn't I become a lawyer or something less life-threatening? And but then at the same time, it keeps me engaged with Antarctica in a very specific way. I have spent time with these creatures. So thinking about how to make a film about them and finding out what movement might impact the audience visually, emotionally, I think about those things when I'm underwater in the small context of the 10-minute video I'm about to show to people. But to gather that footage as a whole and say, all right, let's make something, it was like the best homework assignment.
And listeners, that is our guest, Paul North, who has brought to us the stunning film, Winter in Antarctica. And we've got a clip for you, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
There was a time when Antarctica lived only in the human imagination. A time when science and reason were forming enough to consider the extent of Earth, the sphere we all name as our home. Before the age of exploration began, before we knew that penguins were a possibility, the greatest minds of early eras, even Aristotle himself, envisioned something below, at the bottom of our planet. A frozen landscape with a weight that just might balance the world.
Welcome back to the FLICKFAIR Film Festival official podcast with yours truly, Akil Wingate. Our guest is Paul North, who has brought to us the amazing film, Winter in Antarctica. And just before we went to the break, listeners, you got a chance to hear a bit of the sort of winter magic from Antarctica and the stunning dancers, artists, aerialists, gymnasts performing. Paul, my big question is money shot. There are a bevy of money shots in this film. From the aerial shots of Antarctica to the deep diving shots, where even the close up of the krill, where we see those legs sort of moving in rhythmic fashion, and then coupling it with the dancer on stage. Do you have a money shot that you prefer from your film?
I think any of the long, slow drone above iceberg shots, just because we don't get to see that at the plane of our existence, where we are feet on the ground looking at things a certain way. And we tried to use those as emotional breaks.
Okay.
Sort of as a cold, like breathless break between the intensity of the performances. And the other one you already mentioned, it's when our trapeze artist is wiling out in the air as a krill, adding the passion while you're getting the close-up of that. And that krill footage came from my dear friend James Hyde. I'd like to mention him.
Well, the images are each individual image by itself could go in any number of directions. How did you sort of bring this sort of tapestry of imagery from Antarctica and the dancers and the movement together into a cohesive sort of arc? Did you storyboard in advance of what was going to be brought to the artists on stage, or was it vice versa? They choreographed and then had some imagery for you that you could go through sort of your vault of imagery and say, okay, we're going to pull this and we're going to pull this and bring these things together. What was that process like for you?
Yeah, take everything you know about filmmaking and throw it out the window. I mean, I'll describe the details, but maybe a nice analogy is like, imagine like a big ramp and you're building a vehicle to go down that ramp, and you decide to push and go, and you're gaining momentum all the while still building the vehicle. And that needs to be what it's going to be before it hits the end of the ramp. For anyone who knows filmmaking, I think you should gasp at this, but this whole project, given that weird COVID shutdown window where this talent was available, we did from idea to final product in 5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
No storyboarding, no budget besides what I could scrape together for the nonprofit. Like I said, Rara took care of the Vegas side. Her partner, Jordan Kolar, was the main musician, and he's a performer himself. So I think he has that inclination to create the type of music that serves the movement. And some of that, I think he had sort of in mid-process with no plan for, and he's like, oh, this will be good. And man, it was beyond good. It's like the most epic, like you could put it in a Transformers film if you want like big robots clashing, or you could have Antarctic drone footage. Back to my playwriting ideologies, I just realized that we would treat it, that maybe the best way to expedite was to treat it like a play. I split it into acts. I gave those acts a spatial assignment, like we are now in the water column. Now we are in the benthos, which is the fancy word for the bottom. Then we are at the surface with the krill. And then we are like beyond, meaning like wrap up the film, wrap up the idea, and get some more of those juicy drone shots in. So when I arrived in Vegas, I had not seen a single performance. And we filmed all the performances in one day, a 14-hour film shoot.
Oh, wow.
And just in terms of the cohesiveness of the project, you know, the performers could have filmed and left, and we would have just cycled through them all, but everybody stayed.
Okay.
Everybody stayed because they wanted to see what the others were adding. They had no idea about the footage that we were going to add to it. They were completely in the dark. So this was a full activity of trust behind like the name Meet the Ocean, my effort with that, but also the name of Rara Plasoy and the sort of entity that she is in Las Vegas, and the trust in the community that she has built. And we, like, one more asterisk, we were doing this all while Vegas was closed and Antarctica was closed. So that 5-week window, you know, some suggested, you know, pump the brakes on this, release it next year, get a whole media tour behind it. And I'm like, that doesn't seem timely, and I'd rather be risky. And my friends jokingly call me the Andy Warhol of krill conservation, and so be it.
The thing that really stood out to me is there, with all the percussive sounds from the score, the musical score, as well as the sort of percussive movement of the dancer, gymnast, aerialist. I wonder how you made these aesthetic choices to film certain bits from certain angles within the actual in the midst of the dancers, to be in the full center of the dancers, and then kind of sweep out and get these wide shots or these sort of close-up shots on specific movements. What was your sort of intuition telling you in terms of choosing your musical beats, so to speak, with the imagery of the choreography?
Yeah, I'm just going to have to sidestep the question and say there wasn't as much choice as a typical process allows. It was create, see, get the best of what you can, and then sit in a room for 3 days with my editor and decide what works.
Okay.
Chaos, certainly. And I'm sure some are shaking their head because I haven't sort of followed the normal route. But again, we had a world under pandemic, Antarctica in great and current and ongoing need. So, all guns aimed at the sky.
Well, it works. It works fabulously. The one of the shots, there's a nice shot with three of the artists. One is on the trapeze, and then the two are on the ground, doing sort of these really, really contortionist like handstands. I'm not really good at gymnastic speak, but okay. And the camera sort of pans between them until you have this triangle between the three, and then it cuts back into the ocean where we see this. I don't know. Do you call them a school of krill when you have a group of krill? This massive group of krill in the ocean.
Sometimes they call them bait balls.
Bait balls. You have these bait balls of krill. To me, without you pulling back the curtain and revealing the magician's secrets, it looked absolutely flawless. Like this was something that was planned out over several rehearsals. So to hear you say that this was done in a day, 14 hours, you said?
14-hour film shoot. Yeah.
Wow. That's really remarkable. Was there anything that you left on the cutting room floor that you wish you could have made room for?
Oh, plenty.
Yeah.
I also wish I didn't record the audio in my closet, but hey, nonprofit life, man, you do what you got to do. Given more time, I think there's some things that we could have added a little bit more breath to.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're going to ask me eventually about futures, but I don't think Vegas and Antarctica are done. Meet the Ocean has created a community there. And again, all that trust that created this in an unbelievable timeline, I think that energy still exists and hasn't gone anywhere. It's just, it's existing as pride in the people who participated in this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How many crew people were on hand for your Antarctica shoot?
So performance, there was one cinematographer, Mike Wynn. He's the one who shot the entirety of the 14-hour film shoot, and he understood the dancers. He films Vegas performers. He is one himself.
Okay.
He had a great line because during breaks, I was getting on the trapeze and being my silly self, but I came back to him and he said, circus isn't hard. It just hurts. And I'm like, man, it really does. So props to him for capturing the performers in the way that he did with that timeline. On the Antarctic side of things, we had two drone operators. I mentioned them earlier, Eric and Ian.
Mm-hmm.
We had about 6 or 7 underwater contributors, and those are part of an elite team called, of which I'm among, the undersea specialists.
Okay.
It's not self-assigned, but that's what Nat Geo, their expeditions, call us, which has like a delightful ambiguity. You might be talking about like algae at the surface. You might be making a film with Vegas about Antarctica. You never know.
Yeah. The imagery, listeners, is nothing short of breathtaking. Both the underwater life that we see in Antarctica, as well as the absolutely talented performers that we see on stage in Las Vegas. We have another clip from the film Winter in Antarctica. Our guest is Paul North. We'll be right back.
Who consumes the green algae growing underneath the winter sea ice? The answer is as simple and as complex as a crustacean. We call them krill, the long-lived eaters of algae, cousin of shrimp, dancer in the water. Science names them Euphausia superba, and superb they are because krill are the largest biomass of creatures on planet Earth, the keystone species of Antarctica.
Welcome back to the FLICKFAIR Film Festival official podcast with yours truly, Akil Wingate. Our guest is Paul North, who has brought to us the film Winter in Antarctica. Now, if you have not seen it yet, listeners, you can certainly go to flickfair.com, get your festival pass, and watch the film, as well as go to, where can our listeners find you, Paul, and some of your endeavors?
Yeah, so meettheocean.org. We were on all the social medias. And I think often you hear the word nonprofit and your kind of eyes roll. And we've been dealing with nonprofits our whole lives. Seasonally, they always ask us for money. We kind of know that dance. But I started this endeavor to bring creativity to conservation, to bring what I knew as a playwright and a storyteller. So on our website, there's a lot of great things. There is access to the film. There is also the Penguin Pen Pal program. There's lots of educational material, but there is also our current fundraiser, which attaches into all this because the young ladies who are in our film, the acrobatic gymnastics, as they're called, from the Nevada Rhythmic Academy, they chose to participate with us once again. And we created a living human sculpture using 12 of these young women choreographed in a pose that is essentially like a human wave.
Wow.
Or maybe it's an iceberg, but we call it Antarctica in Motion, and that's on our website as well. And the whole goal of this fundraiser is obviously to have a production budget for all this conservation media we create, but Antarctica in Motion will also be the title of the documentary about how all this happened. And I'm very grateful to be here talking about the behind the scenes processes because I think they're very rich and robust, even more so if we can raise the money to turn this into a documentary.
Wow. What would, in an ideal situation, what would the documentary encapsulate? Behind the scenes, interviews, anything else that your fans and new fans, obviously having watched the film, would be keen to discover? What would be,
just a truth about Vegas. You go to see a show, you're going to get handed a pamphlet. Nobody's name is going to be on it. So hearing from the performers, and I think a whole new creative community is being built where creatives of all levels get to share their story in new and different ways. And that's another beauty of this film, is because we had the tried and true Cirque performers, the adults in the room. But then we had the Nevada Rhythmic Academy. These women were between 11 and 13 years old. And everything was filmed in Nevada Rhythmic Academy. We couldn't have pulled this film off without them. And then they doubled down and did 12 rehearsals in order to create that living sculpture that I described, which was photographed in a professional studio by Jerry Metellus. He's like a celebrity photographer in Las Vegas. So I like to think that what audience would experience from a documentary is, interviews with these performers, asking them why they performed for their planet. What did that feel like? Why did they do it? But also to get some of the unsung heroes of the film who contributed the footage to talk about, what is their life as a drone operator in Antarctica or as a undersea specialist. So it's just another way to shine a light on a faraway place and say, hey, this needs protection, and we're going to keep sort of marching to that tune until that protection is assigned.
And it's also encouraging because I've noticed that one of the goals of Meet the Ocean is outreach, particularly to young people, and this certainly has been nothing short of outreach as well as collaborative in terms of having these young ladies work with you on this project. Are there any ways that people listening might be able to get Meet the Ocean to come to their local school district or participate at a local function of some sort to bring Meet the Ocean to their local community?
Yeah, absolutely. Before the pandemic got a hold of us, we were running full education tours. We did 3 weeks over in Australia. It was kind of like 2 schools a day, and then sort of an adult venue at night, maybe a museum or a bar, or whatever. But yeah, our outreach has focused more digitally these days. We have over 100 podcasts, all educational, all super fun. We did get a nod last year from the Webby Awards as a top 5 educational, top 5 podcast in science and education. Unfortunately, we lost to that mustachioed physicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson. It happens.
If you want me to put a word out into the cosmos for a comet to have his name on it, let me know. I'm kidding. Well, that's amazing to hear because it's certainly well deserved. Anything else that your new fans, obviously, because they're going to have a lot of new fans from our listeners who will be getting a chance to look at the film. Any teasers that you can give to any of your new fans listening right now?
Yeah, a tagline that I've created via this process is that conservation requires movement. Now that pairs nicely with what we are doing in Las Vegas, but I think a lot of us day to day feel frustrated, feel powerless, feel as if any effort we make might not have an effect to change the whole. I would shine a light against that darkness because we are in peril right now, and our future is being written right now. Obviously, in so many ways, there's social crises going on and financial ones, but all of those have to bow to the natural world. Everything does. So I don't do this facetiously. I do this, you sort of referenced to when did I sort of feel my fate earlier. And I do feel that I have a path underneath my feet, and it's to be that, creative Pied Piper leading people to the shore for, way more altruistic reasons than the original story. But we need to awaken people to the importance of our planet because that's a weird phrase. I was going to say you can't eat a celebrity. Maybe you can. That's totally a bad idea. But what I'm saying is like the things we focus on are sort of misaligned right now. We have to focus on what keeps us alive, and that is our planet. And what keeps the ocean healthy, that is Antarctica for so many reasons.
Well, there you have it, listeners. That is our guest, Paul North, who has brought to us the film Winter in Antarctica. Paul, thank you so much for joining us. It truly has been a pleasure talking with you. Listeners, be sure to go to meettheocean.org to find out more about this film and all the wonderful things that our guest Paul North and his colleagues are up to. Until next time, take care.